The new patch has dropped, and after playing about 40 games or so on the new patch, I want to tell you which items are just straight overpowered and what the new go-to build paths are. So if you scroll down the changes, you will see that the vast majority of items were buffed, a few are more or less power neutral, and then a couple were nerfed. However, there are three currently really overpowered items that really stand out. Number one is Hextech Rocket Belt. So the changes that Rocket Belt has received have made it into an absolute powerhouse. This item is insanely broken as a first item for any melee AP assassin or bruiser, so champions like Akali, Fizz, Echo, Diana, Sylas, etc. Sylas, I think, especially is ridiculously good with it, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's S tier or very close to it this patch. In the past as well, Rocket Belt was used on champions like Lissandra, Galio, and Annie. I think these champions do have better builds right now, but that might be something to keep an eye on. Our second OP item is Storm Surge. So Storm Surge is quietly a lot better this patch, being both cheaper and providing more movement speed all the time. It has a really great niche now in that it has a better build path than Shadow Flame, whilst also providing more survivability just through that movement speed. I wouldn't say it's so overpowered that you should just build it every game, but it can be a really solid second item for looking to snowball into squishy comps, especially if you don't base with enough gold in order to access Shadow Flame's more difficult build path. The third OP item, and my favorite one, is Cryptloom. So I would say that for any champion that likes ability haste, it's now just a better option to go for Cryptloom than it is to go for Void Staff. But what makes it really good is that it's also one of the best second item options. So having access to early percent pen, haste, and ability power all with a nice build path is really good for any game when the enemy team has a little bit of magic resist. But it's actually so good as an item that it sometimes outperforms even when the enemy team doesn't build magic resist. So for this, I decided to do some testing. Even against a 40 magic resist target, Cryptloom often outperforms other AP or haste options like Horizon, and that difference only grows with higher MR targets. You might be wondering if that's true when you factor in Death Cap, because Horizon is giving more AP, which then synergizes with Death Cap, but you actually see that it still holds true. Now, obviously, it's a little champ dependent, and there are other things to think about. For example, like AP ratios, abilities that don't scale with magic pens. So Oriana's shield, for example, it's not like you're hitting the opponent with it, or even the value of the passes on the items themselves, right? Like, how do you value the vision passive of Horizon versus the heal passive of Cryptloom? But the short form of it is that an early Cryptloom is really good. It won't be as big an early spike as a Shadow Flame or a Storm Surge, but it soon outpaces them, and if the enemy team is building any magic resist, it's basically going to be better the moment you buy it anyway. Let's go through choosing your first and second items. So for the first items, if you're an assassin, you're probably going to rush Rocket Belt. It's just overall the best. You could rush Storm Surge or Lichbane. It does give you more damage overall, but I think that Rocket Belt is so overtuned that basically if you can use it, you should build it. There is, again, maybe an argument for going some stuff like Rod of Ages, especially in more difficult matchups because the Catalyst is so strong, but overall, Rocket Belt is going to be your go-to as any AP assassin or bruiser. For mages, obviously you're going to build a chapter item first, so that could be, any of the chapter items. We've got Malignance, Ludens, Blackfire, and Seraphs. Now, as for which chapter item you should go for, I'm still of the opinion that Ludens is a little overrated. It's not terrible now, but I do think if you didn't use Ludens before, you probably still shouldn't use it now. Like, I'm not a super huge fan of people building it on Cinder or whatever. I think that overall, Blackfire is probably still the best. I think Ludens is good on the champs that don't really use another one really well. If you were a champ that used Malignance, like Ari or Annie or whatever, the extra AP that Malignance got definitely made it better. Seraphs is nerfed, but I still think it's quite good, and I actually think it's quite good as a second item, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, Seraphs is still an option if you really do need the survivability, but maybe it's not an item that you can go literally every game like you did before, so it is a little more situational. If you played a champion that didn't rush any of these things before, so if you're a champion that rushed Rylai or whatever, most likely you're going to continue doing that. I don't think any of the items have been buffed so much other than Rocket Belt to make you really give up previous builds, but unless you use Rocket Belt really well, you're probably better off doing what you did before. One other thing I do want to mention is that even though Rod of Ages got nerfed, it is still possible, if you're in a really bad matchup, that you can go for Rod of Ages. Now, personally, I think it's better to sit on the Catalyst and not upgrade to Rod of Ages. This does definitely clutter your inventory a little bit, and it also kind of slows down your power spikes, but the way I would see it is you should be kind of forced into building a Catalyst rather than actually wanting to. Like, if you're in a really bad assassin matchup, or you're in a really bad range matchup where you get poked out a lot, you can build the Catalyst, and then you can probably just go normal items from there. There is, I guess, bonus points for building a Seraphs at that point because you do synergize with extra mana. So you could do something like Catalyst, Seraphs, and then your regular second item. I think that is definitely an option. Coming over to your second item, that's when you get some real choice. So if you want Burst, you have a few options. You've got Storm Surge, you've got Shadow Flame, and you've maybe got Lichbane depending on what champ you are. Most of the time, though, it's going to be between Storm Surge or Shadow Flame. So both of these are really good, again, against squishy compositions, or if you really want to snowball. I would say overall Shadow Flame does do more damage, but the build path is quite punishing. Basically, if you can't buy the rod outright, you can very easily get stuck on an alternator, and then you just recall on the next base with nothing to buy, and that's like a major power trough that if you are building snowballing items, you really want to avoid. Storm Surge, on the other hand, much cheaper, much better build path, does not do as much damage, but it does offer movement speed, which is really nice. Like 6% movement speed all the time is a lot. So I think both these items are pretty solid, and of course, yeah, Lichbane can be useful for certain chance to burst. You know, you think of things like, you know, potentially Silas or Akali or whatever, Fizz, Echo, but definitely not all of them, right? Like there are plenty of champions that do not get a whole lot of value either out of the haste or out of the Lichbane proc itself. If you're not playing a burst champion or you just don't want to go down that path for whatever reason, then you can go for a haste option instead, and there are a lot of those available. So the first one, which I talked about already in this video, is Cripploom. I think Cripploom should be your default second item as a mage. If you're not sure what to build, just go for Cripploom because you can't really go wrong with it. It's a super solid item and can deal with basically any situation. Now, Cosmic Drive is still good. Cosmic Drive didn't get touched at all. It does have value with Blackfire, and if you're a champion that wants haste but also wants some movement speed and survivability from the health, you know, if Cripploom is just a bit too risky for you to go for, then you can go for Cosmic. It is definitely going to be a damage loss, but it's still a super solid option. There is, of course, Lichbane. So Lichbane is much easier to build. They made the build path way more accessible by getting rid of the rod. I do think you kind of have to be ahead to make use of Lichbane because you do need to get those autos off in team fights, and it really does get value if you can hit turrets in the side lane as well. So again, a situational option, but maybe not your default. There is also Horizon Focus, so I'm kind of the opinion that Horizon Focus is overrated because I think Cripploom is pretty much a better option, and I think also that Horizon Focus kind of competes with Seraphs as a second item as well. So something we haven't seen in a while is running double mana builds. So an example would be, you know, going for tier, then going like first item Blackfire or whatever, and second item Seraphs. And the reason that can be quite good is because the way they've changed it now to where the passive is scaling here with your max mana, obviously having more max mana is going to just, you know, give you a bigger shield, and the more bonus mana from items, you're going to get more AP. So if you build Seraphs after building another mana item like Blackfire or whatever, it's going to give you, I think it's roughly 37 AP from its passive, and then it also is giving you a shield of around about 400 instead of 300. So it actually then has a lot of value, because what that means is that by going Seraph second with a Blackfire or something, as opposed to Horizon, really all you're giving up is a tiny amount of AP. I think you lose like, yeah, maybe 3 AP or something in total. You're getting the same amount of ability haste, but you're also gaining, you know, 1k mana on top of it. You're gaining a shield of about 400, and all you're really giving up is the Horizon Vision passive, which admittedly, while valuable, I don't think is as good as having all that extra mana and having the shield. I guess there is also the downside of you have to buy a tier, which could potentially clutter your inventory, maybe weakens your first base a tiny bit, and I suppose delays your first spike by again a tiny bit, but I think that's more than worth it. So I'm kind of at the point where I think Horizon might just suck, not because the item itself is bad by any means, but it just kind of feels that like Cripploom or Seraphs kind of cover what it's good at anyway, and it doesn't have as much of a niche anymore. After you complete your first and second items, I think you should basically always go Deathcap and Void. So if you go back and look at my old champion guides and stuff, you will see that I have third and fourth Deathcap and Void in this slot on basically every champion. You can delay Deathcap a tiny bit. If you know you're not going to need pen, you can delay Deathcap till 4 items, but I wouldn't delay it beyond that. So it would be okay to, for example, pick up 2 situational second items, and then, you know, basically that's your second and third, and then you go for Deathcap 4th, Void 5th, if you know you're not going to need any pen. The reason I don't like this is because Magic Resist can kind of come out of nowhere, and if you do end up against someone that has MR and you don't have pen, it really sucks. And that's one thing, again, I really like about Cripploom second, is it really prevents and protects you from that sort of scenario. You're never going to be in a position where the enemy team suddenly has Magic Resist, and you have to choose between either not having a Death Cap and therefore having no AP, or not having a Void or a Cripploom, and then having no way to get through all that Magic Resist. Finally, I want to finish up this video by talking about a couple underrated items and some of the questions questions I get all the time. So the first one is, does Liandry suck? I would say the answer is no. So Liandry is like a little weaker than before, but it still can be good against very heavy health compositions. And if you're a champion that really used Liandry well, as opposed to kind of just built it because you didn't have anything else to build, then you can definitely still go for it. You know, champions like Cassio, 10 AP less is not going to be worth giving that item up. It's doing something like 5 to 6,000 damage a game, which is a huge amount of your damage, right? So definitely still look for that on the champions that go for it. But if you're looking to deal with tanks now, especially as another champion that maybe doesn't use the burn so well, you probably want a pen item like Crippler instead. Now, if you were just building Liandry for the stats, I think I think Riftmaker is a really underrated item. So I do think there are some champions that previously would go, you know, Roa into Liandry, or maybe go Roa into Liandry into Riftmaker. I think now it might just be better to go Riftmaker second. Like, this item is definitely pretty good, and it's got super solid stats, and it's a great item for, you know, again, those kind of like bruisers and battle mages and stuff that just kind of don't really have an item to build, right? So definitely keep an eye on Riftmaker. I think that item's pretty good. Another one that's really underrated now is Bloodletters. So Bloodletters previously was okay. It just didn't see that much play because, well, one, you want to avoid having AP heavy compositions to begin with, but two, there just weren't that many champs that could stack it up quickly, and it just gives less shred overall. At least now, though, you can stack it a lot quicker, which opens the pool of champs that can use it. So if you are playing on a really heavy, you know, team composition of AP, and especially if no one else on your team is going to build Bloodletters or just like doesn't apply it well, it can be worth buying. Even on champions that don't necessarily like use the health that well, you know, being able to give 30% shred to your team, especially if you're the only one who can buy it early, I think is really, really valuable. So that's definitely an item that you should be thinking about as a second, third, or fourth item. And finally, I just want to reiterate what I was talking about before of the double mana builds. I think there's a really good chance that a lot of mages are going to play, you know, tier into either, you know, Luden's Malignant Seraphs, or sorry, Luden's Malignant Blackfire, and then go into second item Seraphs. I think this is another solid build that you can't really go wrong with, and it definitely gives you a lot of survivability. And of course, this does work with the Catalyst build as well, right? Like if you went for tier Catalyst Seraph, you do get value out of all that extra mana too. So I think that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully this cleared up some of the thoughts, concerns, and stuff that you guys have about itemization. Anything else, come to my stream or put them in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.